Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Trasna na Tíre lecture. This will be our 108th lecture tonight when we started out in March of last year. So I'm delighted to welcome Robert Harris, who's going to give us an overview on William Hull. Hull was an English adventurer from Devon who was planted in Munster in around 1605. He held extensive lands overlooking Roaringwater Bay and established fisheries in the waters of the bay. In this, he was partnered by Robert Boyle, the Great Earl of Cork. In fact, Hull's empire was the centre of the nest of pirates with which he was complicit in making considerable financial gains from his dealings. So with this, I'm going to hand you over to Robert, who is going to give us tonight's presentation. So thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. We did have a few technical problems and we were trying to get in. If you can hear me, that's fine. If you can't, you better shout. I'm going to share the screen to start with because I'm going to show you lots of pictures. Okay. How are we doing? Can everyone see that all right? Yes. Okay, I don't seem to have
perfect.
I don't see myself here, but does that matter? Should I be able to see myself? Okay.
No, that's fine. That's fine, Robert. You're
okay.
grand.
All right. Okay. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this talk. I put this talk together a little while ago now, for the first time in Ballydehob, our own local village. Which is great in terms of getting people together, doing interesting things, like having talks on local history. So this was a local history talk at the time because Ballydehob, as many of you will know, is in the southwest of Ireland, on the coast, and the coast faces out to Roaringwater Bay, which is central to our subject tonight. So I thought you'd be interested to see this map. It's a 14th century map of Ireland and Britain. We'll do it in that order. And I'm always interested in this map because you see there, that's Dursey. Dursey, as some of you may know, is a little tiny island off the west coast of the Beara Peninsula. And so why is that the only significant place shown on this 14th century map of Ireland in the southwest? Well, it was the stronghold of the O'Sullivan Bears. So that could be the reason. But the other two things that interest me on this map are these two islands. One is Brazil and the other is Daymar. And they're both sort of mythical islands, although St. Brendan is said to have discovered them on his voyage in the 6th century. And navigators ever since have also seen them at various times. In fact, somebody as late as 1865, and Captain John Nisbet in 1674 claimed to have landed on Brazil on a journey from France to Ireland, and found that the island was inhabited by large black rabbits and a magician who lived in a stone castle, lived alone in a stone castle. So how about that? So is that relevant to our talk? Well, not really, but I thought you'd be interested. So let's have a closer look at Ireland. And this is Abraham Ortelius, who was a great map maker. And this is how he saw Ireland. And it's an interesting view, isn't it? If you want to see it properly, you really have to turn your head at right angles, 90 degrees, and then you'll see where we are, because the top of the map is west, the bottom of the map is east, on the right, obviously, is north, and on the left is south. But it's a fairly detailed map, and you can see Munster over there on the left, Mannonia. Underneath it says Munster, or Munster. It also has lots of castles marked on it. And this is the area we're interested in. It's got, I don't know whether you can see it clearly on your screen, but it does show Cape Clear as a separate island, which is one of the islands of Roaringwater Bay. Now we'll go on a bit, 1610, again, another map from a famous map maker, John Speed. And here he is showing Munster in all its glory. And this is a wonderful map. In fact, we could spend a whole talk talking about old maps, but we won't today. But you will find I'm a bit of a digressor, I'm afraid. In other words, I do tend to digress because things interest me and I think they might interest you. But they do all have a bearing on what we're talking about. So here we are. Look down at the very bottom of this map. You can see Cape Clear, the little island, and above it, the islands of Roaringwater Bay. And those are the islands, which you can see them from the high point in West Cork. It's Mount Gabriel, looks right out over the bay. And you can see that it's a whole collection of islands and the channels that run between them. Ideal territory if you want to hide from somebody. And that's probably the reason why it became what we call a pirate's nest. Now look at that bit there. See, there's a little tower sticking up there. Well, that's going in a bit closer. That is Rossbring Castle, a tower house dating from the 13th or 14th century. And in front there, you can see an old quay. That's the remains of a medieval quay, because Rossbring Cove, which is a big natural inlet, sheltered inlet, was a great center for fishing and also a center for piracy. And they go hand in hand, really, as we'll see as we proceed with the talk. This is Finneen O'Mahony. He was the Toynishter of the O'Mahony clan in the late 15th century. He lived at Rossbring Castle. He was known as the Scholar Prince of Rossbrin because he surrounded himself with scribes and monks, and books were written there, books which still exist in some places. And he was a great man of learning and letters. He conversed with all the fishermen from Spain, Portugal, France, who came over to fish the very rich waters of Roaringwater Bay. He conversed with them in Latin because that was a common language. And he did cause, the place was described in his day, or in our day perhaps, as the greatest center of learning in Europe. So there it is now, just a crumbling ruin, Rossbring Castle, home of the Raven. Another little further along the coast to the east is another castle you may be familiar with. This is Kilcoe Castle, which was restored by Jeremy Irons, fully restored. So we can actually see what one of these tower houses looked like in medieval times. And it's rather magnificent, isn't it, when it shines in the evening sun like that. Going the other way, this is Arden Tennant. And this was the seat, also the seat of the O'Mahaneys, but this was the Taoiseach who lived in this one. And I thought you'd be interested in this photo because it shows either half the Irish Navy or 2/3 of the Irish Navy. I'm never quite sure which, but I was delighted to capture them in front of the castle like that. And that is relevant to our talk, actually, because this was the Navy in Ireland, shall we say, or at least in this part of Ireland, a long time ago in around 1600. And this is known as the King's ship Tramontana. And it was a ship that patrolled the waters around the coast of Munster. And you can see the red dotted line there that shows you the territory that that single ship had to patrol to make sure there wasn't anyone doing anything they shouldn't be doing, like bringing ashore smuggled goods and contraband. So let's, oh yes, and it was armed with one cannon, by the way. So it wasn't a very formidable threat to whoever was up to no good in West Cork in those days. So that's a close up of the islands as shown on John Speed's map. And it's rather fine, isn't it? I think it's a wonderful map. And look, you've got Baltimore Bay at the bottom. You've got all those islands. As I say, excellent hiding places. You can see Rossbrin. It's like RO and one of those old-fashioned S's that looks like an F, Brennon. That is Rossbrin Castle that I showed you earlier. And there are names on this map as well. You've got McCarthy's, you've got O'Mahony's, you've got O'Connor's, you've got Sheepshead over there, which says Sir Peter Carew. We'll talk about him in a minute. But this is what the lie of the land was like around the year 1600, which is the sort of time we're talking about. Oh, yes, and I must identify Leamcon because it comes in our title. That's the townland, and it was actually the home of William Hull. who we have yet to discover. So William Hull and the Lemcon Pirates' Nest. This is like one of those films where it goes on for about half an hour and then they have the title. So this is me giving you the title. And I've called it a perambulation because I didn't quite know what else to call it, because I'm going around the subject and hoping that you'll get something from it by the end of the day. Anyway, we start off here. Medieval Exeter, another wonderful map. You can see I'm totally into maps. And you can see there the medieval city of Exeter with a wall all the way around it. That wall was actually built on foundations which were laid by the Romans, because the Exeter was a Roman town initially. It was called Isca. And it's been going ever since. And you can see in the foreground the river, which is the Exe, which runs out into the sea not very far away. And so there's a lot of shipping and trade coming into Exeter down the bottom right there. If we go up a bit and close in on the map, you can see at the bottom the water, and something that says Crane Cellar there, and Watergate, and the quay, K-A-Y. But go up towards the top of that little extract and you'll see Larkbeer. Larkbeer literally means meadow of the larks, and it's a medieval manor house, and that is also central to our subject today. If we go out a bit and go across to the left, you'll see there's a wonderful cathedral there, and that is the Cathedral of St. Peter, which was started in the 1100s and completed more or less in the 1300s. And there it is, and that is amazing, I think. It's supposed to be the longest uninterrupted medieval vaulting in the world, and it's 96 meters long. And isn't it an incredible piece of architecture? Well, we nearly didn't have it because in 1942, the Luftwaffe decided to have a go at it. And in fact, they did hit it during the Blitz. Now, as you can see, there was a lot of destruction, but fortunately, the good burghers of Exeter prepared themselves for this eventuality, and they'd filled the cathedral with, they'd removed anything of any value that they could remove, and filled the floor of the cathedral with sandbags to actually minimize any damage that bombs might do. And fortunately, as you could see from the previous picture, the place has been rebuilt and is well looked after actually now. But just as another aside, and I'm full of asides, when it was known, or when it became likely that the Germans were going to come over and bomb this city in retaliation, of course, for the cities we were bombing in Germany, there was serious debate that they should actually demolish the cathedral, because then the Germans would have no reason to come over and drop their bombs. Fortunately for us, of course, that proposal wasn't proceeded with, and instead they protected the cathedral as best they could. So let's come to this man. Let's go back to where we're supposed to be, which is back in around 1600. And this man is Sir George Carew. Now, the reason I'm showing Sir George Carew, he was connected with Munster. We'll see that later. But yes, in fact, he became president of Munster in 1600. But this is where he lived, in Exeter, another manor house. And this is what his manor house looked like in 1850. Rather nice little pastoral scene there, obviously, or pretense of being something big and important that seems to have gone by this time. And in 1950, the same place looked like this. It's called Bowhill Manor. It was built in the 1400s. In 1970s, it was in such a poor state that it was taken over by the state, and there you can see restoration taking place. It's really interesting if you're into architecture, which I am. The areas which look sort of orange colored are actually cob, which is earth or clay. And a lot of the building was built out of that very highly insulated material, or an insulating material, by the way. Anyway, the reason I'm showing you this is partly just out of personal interest, because I was an architect with a practice in Exeter. And at the time that English Heritage had finished their work on this building and were looking for someone to take it on, we as a practice were looking for a place to rent out to make our architectural offices. And in fact, that's where I used to work, in Bowhill House. And I think that sets out my stall as a connection with medieval Exeter, if you like. And just so as you know, we negotiated a 999-year lease with English Heritage for this property at a rent of £1 a year, which we paid in advance. So I think we've got a pretty good deal there, although we did have to completely look after the property and maintain it, which is actually an expensive job. Anyway, I've retired from there now, happily, and I live here. And so let's get back to William Hull. What do we know about him? Born in 1574. He was knighted in 1621, Sir William Hull, and he died in 1643. Well, there's some bare facts, and they begin to give you a picture. We do have a pedigree, which is here, and this is only a part of it. So it was a well-connected family, the Hulls of Larkbere. They were merchants, they were ship owners, and they helped to build a canal, which actually safely brought seagoing ships right into the middle of Exeter. And the canal and its canal basin is still there today. And I thought that was a rather nice picture to show you of that. But anyway, homing in on this pedigree, as I've called it, there's Sir William, Knight of Irish Town, County Cork. And it gives you the date of his being knighted. So that's where he came from originally. And this is Larkbere. This is a painting of it, as it would have looked probably in the 18th century. This is what's left of Larkbere today. Not very much, in fact, just a few walls. There's the remains of a doorway, which is now in the museum in Exeter, a very fine doorway. And it was built over this river. Now, you can say that however you like, but I think you'll get the idea of why it was built there. In fact, in modern times, the name of the river has been changed to this. But the point is that the river is gone. It was obviously a drain running right through the town, running right underneath Larkbere. It's actually where that pedestrian crossing is today. And as you can see, the city has encompassed the whole of this area. In the 1950s, they actually had to excavate, they had to do some road widening, and they found this underneath Larkbere House, the original medieval structure supporting the house. And you can see there's a drain coming out from somewhere in the house and coming out into what we can only call a sewer, really. So we have this conundrum, really. We've got William Hull, and this is how I'm portraying him, but we don't know what he looked like. There are no portraits. There's nothing very tangible to connect us with this man. So, you know, William Hull, question mark, except for one thing, and here it is. Oops, I went past it. Yes, this is a guardrabe seat from Larkbere House that was used in the 16th century. So it's quite likely it was sat upon frequently by William Hull. So we don't have a portrait of him, but we do have his lavatory seat. Okay, going back to Devonshire, just to show you where we are. Devonshire, as you know, is on the southwest peninsula of Britain, and it's got coastlines on both sides. So north there, Bristol Channel, south there, English Channel. Very long coastlines, and in fact, because of this, it became known as a maritime county. And there's Exeter, which we've been looking at, the home of Hull. But let's explore Exeter a bit. Look at this. Now, some of you may be familiar with this painting. It's by John Millais, and it's called The Boyhood of Raleigh. And there's no mistaking Raleigh in this picture. It's Sir Walter Raleigh, as we knew him later. Whenever you see a representation of Raleigh, he's always dressed in the same way. And so there are these two boys listening to this Genoese sailor who's telling them the future lies out at sea. Get yourself out there. All paintings have some sort of symbolism built into them. If you look at the bottom left, you can see a toy boat just coming into the picture. This actually signifies, of course, that Raleigh would become a mariner, as a lot of Devon people were. A lot of the really famous mariners of that time were actually from Devon. But over on the right, what's that? It's an anchor, an anchor, a ship's anchor. But don't you think, as I do, that it actually looks like an executioner's axe, which of course rather foretells Raleigh's ultimate future. So there's a statue of him in Greenwich. Again, he's wearing the same sort of outfit he was wearing as a boy. And you know he's responsible for bringing these to Ireland, don't you? So there we have the Queen, Queen Elizabeth I. She was just Queen Elizabeth at the time, of course. And this is a famous painting of her. It was made in 1588. It's called the Armada painting. And you can see top left there, picture of the ships that, the English ships that tackled the Armada. And over on the right, there's the Spanish fleet, which is foundering because of storms and various other things. Another painting with lots of symbolism, just out of interest, and I know you're interested. So look at that. That is actually supposed to be a pomegranate. And the pomegranate is a symbol of prosperity. So that's quite reasonable for a queen. Next, we have pearls, and you can see she's wearing great strings of pearls around her neck, but also her tunic there has pearls all over it. And pearls are a symbol of purity and chastity, as we all know. Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen. Now, this one might be a bit controversial. This is a mermaid, and it's said of this painting and of mermaids, the mermaid represents the potential destructive nature of females. Now I'm quoting here, this isn't me that's saying this. So I hold my hands up. Lastly, the ruff. It's supposed to be the rays of the sun because Elizabeth was known as the Sun Queen. So it's a very fine portrait. And it's always good to look at portraits and see what's actually behind them. Now here's somebody else. Some of you may know who this is, Carew or Grace O'Malley, a famous pirate from Mayo, who of course reputedly met with Queen Elizabeth. And Grace was the pirate queen. Elizabeth was the English queen. And Grace refused to bow and demanded to be treated as an equal because she was a queen as well, which sounds perfectly reasonable to me. So this picture, just out of interest, is from a stained glass window in New York, picture of Grace O'Malley. I did say I digressed a lot, didn't I? So this is Elizabeth's signature. I put that in because I think it's such a fine signature. And this, of course, is the Armada. Now, something I have to tell you that in these times, or in Elizabeth's time anyway, there wasn't any sort of formal navy, believe it or not. In fact, it was the first PPE, public-private enterprise, in that the state commissioned individual ships and ship owners to do whatever was necessary to fight, to go and trade and all that sort of thing. So the Armada, or the fleet that met with the Armada, was actually like a lot of mercenaries, really. A lot of people who were interested in sailing, mariners, a lot of them from Devon, who went together, but with Drake's strategy, Francis Drake, of sending in a whole lot of fire ships into the Spanish fleet unexpectedly. He sent them all off course, and then they ended up, as you know, going around the coast and even coming around the coast of Ireland to try and escape back to Spain. Some of them doing so, but many of them not doing so. So it's all part of the world of William Hull. I like to sort of put things in context. So what I'm going to do now is explore. William Hull was born in the second half of the 16th century and lived on well into the first half of the 17th century. So let's have a look at those times. And I like to do it as a word cloud. So here we are. Now, you don't have to read through all these, but I'll pick out one or two that are interesting. The Pope orders priests to stop smoking cigars. Did you know that? that happened at that time. First popcorn introduced, kissing in public banned, and there's an interesting one on the left. Flush toilets invented. So we'll explore that a bit. Sorry, excuse me. I'll just have a drink. The flushing toilet was invented by Sir John Harrington in 1590, or around about that time. He was a godson of Queen Elizabeth, and she saw this machine that he'd invented in his house and liked it so much that she demanded he build her one too, which he did in Hampton Court Palace. So there you can see this cleric sitting on this seat. It's a strange picture, and I'll explain that in a minute. So he's sitting on the seat. There's a pump beside him, which actually evacuates and flushes what's in the bowl. And above him, there's the cistern, which you see lots of little fishes jumping up and down in. And on the right is the devil. Well, what's that all about? Okay, so it was from a political pamphlet published at the time. It was published in 1596. And it was all about, and it was also called The Metamorphosis of Ajax. And John Harrington called his flush toilet the Ajax. And you probably know that Ajax is a slang term for a toilet even to this day. Anyway, and the pamphlet was an attack on the excrement that is poisoning society. And in fact, that meant the corruption and nepotism that was rife in the higher echelons of government. And isn't it strange that 400 years ago or more, it was just the same as it is today. Let's just go back to here. We've got carrier pigeons first used. We've got a man could be fined for not wearing a cloth cap. We've got the first UFO sighting in America down there at the bottom. Isn't that interesting? And here it is. So this was seen in 1577 in one of the colonies in Virginia. Great light in the sky that was there for days. Nowadays, of course, we think it was probably a comet, but nice to think that it was a UFO. And then there's even more. Look, we've got the gunpowder plot, of course, the Little Ice Age, first submarine invented. This is all in the time of William Hull. First English play to be censored, Protestants burned. Spanish Armada, we've already talked about. Cowboys, so called for the first time. First clockwork time bombs. And a queen beheaded. Now, who was that queen that was beheaded? No, it's nothing to do with Henry VIII. This is after his time. Okay, here she is. She is, of course, or was called Lady Jane Grey, and her husband and her father plotted to actually get their daughter to take over, or the Lady Jane to take over the English throne when it was vacated by Edward VI, who died at the age of 16. He came after Henry VIII. Well, it didn't last very long, unfortunately. In fact, this is her in 1554 when she was executed. And she only reigned for 9 days. And so this is the first use of the term, a 9 days wonder, if you've ever heard that term before. Anyway, let's go to William Hull himself and see what he was up to. So as I say, this is what I've made him look like, because he did call himself a gentleman. And I think that looks a bit like shall we say, a gentleman in the early 17th century. So he was born in Larkbere, 1574. He became a privateer for a while because this was something that his parents felt he should do. We'll talk about privateering in a minute, find out what it really means. But in 1604, he was actually arrested for piracy. But because he had good connections, he evaded punishment. He then came over, he was part of the Munster plantation. It was a big experiment, as you know, to try and settle English people in Ireland to make a difference in Ireland. I'm not quite sure about that myself, but there we are. And he very soon got a high office. He was appointed Deputy Vice-Admiral of Munster. Now, there were several Deputy Vice-Admirals, I have to say, but they were appointed to try and sort of bring a bit of law and order to what was probably not a very law-abiding place. And there we have, in 1609, described himself as gentleman. he also had a formal commission to actually parley with pirates to persuade them to seek pardons. And because of the piracy and smuggling were so dominant in this part of Ireland that it was thought, rather than to try and round them all up, which was impossible, you should try and sort of carrot rather than stick. And they were given pardons and indeed given titles and land as well, if they would give up the piracy. But in the same year, we see here, he was denounced by the Admiralty as a notorious, this is William Hull, denounced as a notorious harbourer of pirates and receiver of their goods. But it was, okay, we do know he was involved in illicit dealings, but he also had legitimate businesses, and one of them was fishing. And from 1612 onwards, he created a lot of fisheries and fish palaces in West Cork, Waterford, and Newfoundland, as it happens. And then in 1616, he started a partnership with Sir Richard Boyle, who was the Great Earl of Cork, the first Earl of Cork, who was another big character in these times. And there he is. Just to give you an idea of his status, this is part of his memorial in St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. As you can see, it's pretty ornate. But not only did he just have the one, he had another memorial in Youghal, which is where he had a lot of lands, as did Sir Walter Raleigh. And in fact, Boyle bought a lot of his land off Sir Walter Raleigh very cheaply, and in the end never paid him. But there, that's another story and another talk. So there's Boyle. And when he died, it was said that he'd been the richest man in the known world. And he certainly seemed to get around and know his stuff. Here's a map that he drew. It's a map of Baltimore, which is, as you know, in the southwest of Ireland, off Roaringwater. And I like this map for many reasons. It was drawn because he wanted to draw the Admiralty's attention to the fact that Baltimore was a place at risk, not from the pirates of West Cork, but from pirates further afield. But in drawing this map, he actually drew a very good representation of what seine fishing looks like. Can you see that? There's boats with a net going between them, two boats, net going between them. They surround a shoal of pilchards or herrings or whatever was to be caught. And that was the biggest trade in this part of Ireland, fishing, particularly for pilchards. The waters were very rich with pilchards. But there we are. I really like the way that map is drawn. You can see at the bottom Baltimore with its houses on their sides, ships and everything. And I'm coming forward a couple of 100 years or more to show you what seine fishing looked like. And this is a painting by one of the artists from West Cornwall, in fact, because the same sort of fishing took place over there. And in fact, a lot of the fishermen from West Cornwall came to Ireland after the summer when the fish had actually left Cornwall, and did a lot of fishing around Roaringwater Bay. This was in the 19th century. And there's another there, which is a very good representation. And just to show you, this is St. Ives in Cornwall, and that strange looking pile in the middle is pilchards being salted, having been caught. And there's an awful lot of them, as you can see. So you can see what a big trade it was. And it was reckoned that on one occasion in St. Ives, the 56 million pilchards were caught in one day. This photo dates from around the late 1800s. So when you caught the pilchards, you had to do something with them. And obviously they needed preserving, especially as there were so many. So they were put in salt and put in barrels, and then the barrels were sent off. So the fishing industry as such in those days required a lot of paraphernalia. Let's come on to something which is no doubt important to William Hull. He was knighted in 1621 at Tybalt's Palace. And this is Tybalt's Palace. It's in Hertfordshire, about an hour's ride north of London. It was very popular with the Queen Elizabeth, and later with James I. They both used it as a sort of stopping off place when they were touring around. It's also famous, Tybalt's Palace is also famous because of this. Now, who's that? Of course, you know who it is because he's dressed exactly the same as he was when we saw him earlier. It's Sir Walter Raleigh. And as you know, he's supposed to have introduced tobacco into these islands, although in fact there are many other theories. But anyway, the story is that there he is smoking his pipe. His servant came in, bringing him wine, and thought that Sir Walter was on fire. So he threw the wine over Sir Walter. And that's a story which is told not just here, but many other places as well. Now, he was knighted, so William Hull was knighted Sir William Hull of Irishtown. Now, some people have said, oh, that's because it was a derogatory term because he lived in Ireland. Well, no, that's not the case. In fact, William Hull, in his earlier days, had property in Bandon. And if you go to Bandon, if you arrive at Bandon from the east, you come to a great big traffic roundabout. And that is where Irishtown is situated. It's even called that today. And there's an industrial estate there as well. So not a very salubrious place, but there we are. For some reason, William Hull chose, or somebody chose for him, the title William Hull of Irishtown. Now, he was an astute man, William Hull, and he married into the Boyle family. Very sensible thing to do. And then that was 1622. Then 1625, we find he's captured 8 pirates at Long Island and they were sent to Cork to be hanged. Well, that doesn't seem quite to tally with what we know about William Hull and the fact that he actually collaborated with pirates. And I think probably he perhaps overstepped the mark somewhere down along the way and had to show that he was capable, in fact, of sending the pirates to justice. So there we are. He hanged 8 pirates. In fact, there are only 7 in this picture, so it must be another occasion, I think. Difference between hanging and gibbeting. I expect you know this, but we saw hanging just now. This is gibbeting, where you actually put the body, either alive or dead, in an iron cage and set it up either just as so that they'd starve to death or as a sort of lesson to those who might transgress. You can see they still do it in London because it's London in the present time. A bit unkind really in this day and age, isn't it? But they're a funny lot over there. Anyway. 1631, there was a famous pirate occurrence in West Cork. 3 Barbary Corsairs landed at Baltimore and took a lot of English settlers, some say it was 200, I've put 100 here, into slavery in North Africa. And this is something that Hull and the Earl of Cork thought might happen at some point, and that's why they were trying desperately to get defenses improved around the coast. There is a Barbary Corsair, quite fine. They were rowed as well as sailed. Okay, let's get to this nub of what we're talking about. What is a pirate? Well, here's some pirates. You know all about these, don't you? Back in, I'm just shuffling my notes here. Back in, what date we got? I think it was 2005. Anyway, the point is, you know there's an operetta called The Pirates of Penzance by Gilbert and Sullivan. Well, the good people of Penzance in Cornwall, in West Cornwall, decided they wanted to establish a new world record. And that was a world record of having the most number of people dressed as pirates in one place at one time. And this was the occasion, June the 26th of whatever year it was. I've got it written down somewhere, but I can't find it now. Anyway, oh yes, there it is. So it was 2011 and 8,734 participants actually got the world record and got into the Guinness Book of Records. I was there on that day, so I can vouch for that. So piracy, yes, we know what we think we know about piracy. A criminal maritime activity, that's a reasonable description. Dishonest trading, no doubt about that. But also in illegal imports or exports. And really that was the nub of it in West Cork. It wasn't so much piracy at sea, but more bringing in goods, contraband, to get through under the, not under the eye of the customs officer. and then to be distributed. And William Hull was very good at this. He was central to this sort of activity. So we're talking about contraband. Now, this isn't really a true representation of pirates. It supposedly shows pirates taking over another ship. That didn't really happen. What happened was, if you were a pirate and wanting to sort of try and take what was on board another ship, you first of all made sure that you had more forces than the other ship did, and were probably a bigger band, a bigger ship. And you just demanded that they surrendered their goods, which they usually did if they had any sense. So there's very little hand-to-hand fighting, really. It was just that you turned up at the right time and threatened, and then they would give you whatever they had on board in order to get away. And they did get away, because what was the point of pirates having a lot of ships or prisoners or anything like that? That wasn't what they were about. And here's an example of Francis Drake, who was a pirate in a sense, intercepting a large Spanish treasure ship and offloading it. And it's said on this occasion it took 6 days for all the cargo from that Spanish ship to be loaded onto Drake's ships. It shows how much there was. And it was a lucrative trade, of course. But let's go to privateering, because that's of interest to us. So privateering is a sort of private enterprise, in that you decide you're going to go and interfere with the enemy and the enemy's ships, but you're allowed to do it providing you're given permission by the monarch or by the government. And it's done by a letter of marque. In other words, it's a license for piracy, but because the monarch has given their permission for you to go out and intercept the Spanish galleons, you're allowed to do it, and you won't get prosecuted in the country you come from. So you could only privateer or carry out your privateering against an enemy of the state, and this varied from time to time. Drake was known to be a bit casual in the way that he was a privateer, and he didn't always abide by the letter of the law. And in one famous occasion, he only escaped being prosecuted just because he, again, had friends in high places. But it was known as overstepping the mark if you actually went against your driving license, as it were, the equivalent of the driving license that you had on board ship, that allowed you to perform this this act of privateering. So that's where the phrase overstepping the mark comes from. So in the way, privateering is legalized piracy. So let's go specifically to West Cork, and this is the north side of the Mizzen Peninsula, which is the peninsula we live on. And this is Canty's Cove. Now, it's called Canty's Cove after a famous pirate, and there's quite a large pier there, or quay, and it's very sheltered. It's one of those places where you could very easily hide if you wanted to. And I just happened to find this photograph of Canty's Cove taken in the 1920s, and it's fish curing. It shows that a lot of fish came in there. And I'm trying to sort of build this relationship between the legitimate fisheries industry and the slightly less legitimate piracy or smuggling that happened throughout West Cork. Here's an old seine boat, by the way, close to Canty's Cove. Quite a nice picture. And this is a postcard from the 1920s, and it says Canty's Garden. And that's the sort of informal name given to this little promontory of land there opposite Canty's Cove itself. And this is where Canty, who was a notorious character, had a castle. It's called Dunkelly Castle. And you can see that wall across the back of that piece of land which defends it. So Canty had his castle there. He invited people into his castle. He then robbed them, and then he had a trapdoor mechanism, and he just pulled the trap, and the poor unfortunate people who'd already been robbed went into the sea. And that's Canty, of whom many stories are told. And this is also at Canty's Cove. And there are a few of these around West Cork. They're called pirate steps. and they're supposed to have been made by people who carried out pirating activities, or shall we say smuggling activities. This is just one of about 3 or 4 that are known still to exist around the coast. And it enabled small boats to come in close to the shore where they might not be expected to, and then actually access the land and the people around. Another term we find with pirates is buccaneering, and that's a bit of a confusing term, really. I put this slide in because it's the buccaneer, which is actually it's actually a carnival float, believe it or not, in Jamaica, I think. But we've all heard about buccaneers and pirates of the Caribbean, not least because of the series of films that was made about them, not much of which was based on any sort of truth, of course. But we have our own pirates of the Caribbean, and that is Mary Read from Plymouth on the left and Anne Bonny from Kinsale, County Cork on the right. They were notorious pirates. So it shows you it's not just the men. The women are just equally capable of being pirates. And Anne Bonny was known for her fine flowing red hair. We never knew what happened to these two. They worked together. They worked in the Caribbean as pirates, and they disappeared there. So we don't know what became of them. Now, there was a statement, you don't have to read this, I'll tell you what it says. A statement written by the London Privy Council in 1612, because the problem of the pirates had become so pronounced that this was caused to be said there are but two places in the world, that is, from which this desperate crew, in other words, pirates, obtained succor and relief, namely Barbary and the western coast of Ireland. So while Barbary admits no rule of justice or order, but is all in confusion of barbarism and heathenness, there seems no reason why the latter, being part of His Majesty's kingdom, should not be kept free from such unjustifiable correspondence. So there you are, is a statement that why, for goodness sake, is the west of Ireland supposedly part of a civilized group of islands support this barbarous piracy? And this is in the time of James I, who actually had established a navy and was pretty much in charge of maritime affairs. So we're going now to Lemcon, which I pointed out to you earlier. That's the view from Lemcon out towards the bay. And that's just a little aerial map which I marked up to show. On the left there, Lemcon House, which is where William Hull lived for many years. And then to the right of that is Carew Bay. That's how you pronounce that, Carew Bay. And it's a wonderfully secluded inlet. You could hide an awful lot of ships in there without anyone ever seeing, especially that patrol ship, the Tramontana, which would obviously sail past the entrance without seeing anything that might be going on inside. And there's a rather nice name down there on the bottom right, Gun Point, which is still known to this day as Gun Point, that part of the land. And obviously because it was armed, no doubt there were guns there. So this is an early map, probably 1830. It's one of the Ordnance Survey maps, which marks on the townlands. And you can see right in the middle there, the townland of Lemcon. All of that was William Hull's territory. And you can see it was very strategically sited because to the left at the bottom of the townland, there's access to the sea, to the open sea. And then to the right, there's the marsh and Carew Bay itself, which was very useful to him. And that's looking out to Castle Point, which is another Omani castle, which Hull leased. So he had the Castle Point, which is also known as Black Castle. There it is, a fine structure. It's been sort of semi-restored at the present day. Homing in on the map a bit, you can see some things marked on there. You see in the circle Lemcon House. The Lemcon House that's there today, which I'll show you in a minute, wasn't there in Hull's time. He initially had a tower house. And if you look to the left of that circle, within the circle, it says turret. And I think that's where the tower house was. You can also see marked there an old battery, which would have been where there were defenses, and medieval quay at the bottom, a church and burial ground. And there are also everything to do with fishing, fish palaces there. And that's the later map. That's the 25-inch, which dates around 1900, really, showing what it was like then. And there's Lemcon House today, built in 1810. But it's said that some parts of it incorporate a house that Hull built on that site back in the 17th century. But if you look across to the right, you can see some stonework, and that's supposedly where there was a large fish palace, which was part of Hull's empire. And that's some remains of a quay. And that's supposed to be one of the fish palace walls there. And that's the battery. So there would have been cannons mounted on top of that. And again, down to where the channel went from Carew Bay. So looking out from where Hull's house was, this is the view he would have had over Carew Bay. Of course, those houses wouldn't have been there. There were probably many other houses there at the time. And this is what he might have seen. The place, of course, was full of ships, all on legitimate business, of course, fishing, or perhaps not so legitimate business, in other words, piracy. And the legitimate business was all about the fish, and all these little pilchers, which I've shown there in different colors, mark where there were fish palaces. Fish palaces are the places where fish were cured and put into barrels and transported off. The reason for the colors is this is a map I did for a talk on fishing and fisheries. So some of those you can see remains of. Some of them there's no longer any trace, and some are mentioned in various documents, which is why they're different colors. But, so what do you need that's common to piracy and fishing? Well, one, you need to careen your boats, and this is careening, where you have to put the boat on its side and clean its bottom. That's rather a nice painting of careening going on there. You can see it employs a whole lot of people, and that's important, really. You need barrels, so you need barrel makers, you need the makings of barrels. Important industries to have around you. Nets, of course, fishing nets, and people to make the nets and mend the nets. And you need ale houses, because if you're going to have a lot of pirates around you or fishermen, they do need the ale houses. And I wish I knew a bit more about this painting. It doesn't matter to our talk, but over on the left, you can see a strange creature. Is it a dancing bear? Is it a lion? But it seems to be eating the fleur-de-lis, which, as we know, is the symbol of the Prince of Wales nowadays. Anyway, I don't know what it's all about, but like most paintings, there's a lot of symbolism in there. And this, what is this? Well, it's actually a brothel. And of course, those were apparently needed as well. So, so these places were whole centers, really, and particularly Lemcon was a great center. So let's carry on. We're getting close to the end now. So in 1638, Hull built a new house at Clonakilty at a cost of £800 because he was worried about his security at Lemcon. And in fact, in 1641, his empire at Lemcon, and he also had empires at Crookhaven and Skull, were attacked and destroyed by the rebels led by the Omanis, who actually wanted their lands back. They were the one that was the clan that was displaced when the planters came in the in the late 15th century. So he survived the attack and went to live in his house in Clonakilty, and he demanded compensation for his losses from the rebellion. And in fact, he's left behind the most interesting document. This is what it actually looks like in real life. You can see at the top there, it says William Hull himself, etc. So we do have transcripts of it, and this is just one page, which gives you some idea of what he's looking for compensation for. The great and strong houses and fish houses built at Lemcon for £400, 800 barrels of new salt bought from John Collerton of Exeter, £300, barrels of mixed salt, £330. You see, it was all big business. Now, whether he was exaggerating his claim, your guess is as good as mine. If we go on down the sheep, and this is another page, and it does go on for pages and pages, 300 oars for the boats, 2 new seines, and further down, I think there's more seine boats, 5 stacks of corn, and at the bottom, all these sheep, ewes and lamb, 25 rams, 200 wethers. And just to remind you what a sheep looks like, this is a sheep in West Cork. This is a flock of sheep in West Cork. So his total claim that he was making and submitted to the authorities was the actual losses, 7,600, and then his loss from rents, 1,148. If we translate that into the present day, it comes to 4.5 million with another 500,000 in leases. And this is all translated as based on the cost of a cow. So if you take the cost of a cow in Hull's time and then take the cost of a cow today, that's how we get these figures. So as you can tell, he was quite well off, or he hoped to be well off if he actually was, if these claims were awarded against him. But he didn't last long. In 1643, he died. And we don't know where his burial place is. We don't know any more about him. He suddenly vanishes off the scene. And so there's our man, who we've examined in some detail. Maybe you don't know as much about pirates as you thought you might, but anyway, hopefully you've learnt a lot today. Thank you for listening. And these are my sources. As I say, I did put this talk together a few years ago. But today, we're very lucky in that there is a book which was only published last year, this book, written by Connie Kelleher, who we know well. She's an underwater archaeologist. She works for UCC, amongst other places. And she has done the most amazing detailed study of pirates, Ireland and Atlantic piracy in the early 17th century, which goes far beyond anything I've done here. But at least I hope I've given you a bit of an interest. So that's it. Exit. Closing down there. Right. Here we are. Okay.
Hi, Robert. That was fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. That's some amount of detail and work done on that to pull that together, even for tonight's lecture. If anyone has any questions, if you want to just put them into the chat box there. I meant to say it at the start, but I suppose one question I have for you is, considering how lucrative piracy was back in the day, back that time, like particularly for the gentry, would it be safe to assume that William Hull would not have been the only one of his social standing that would have been engaged in piracy?
No, I mean, he's one we know about. There were definitely others. Obviously, the Great Earl of Cork was another one who would have been involved in the whole thing in some way, although I think he was a bit cleverer than Hull. He very seldom put his name to things. But Hull is certainly the one that I know most about, because of course my background is Exeter, and I knew about the Hull family then anyway. So of course the whole thing interested me from that point of view. So I've given you perhaps a bit of a skewed picture in that respect. But certainly Hull was right at the center of the Roaringwater Bay pirate's nest. He hosted it, if you like.
Okay. Just a couple of comments here now. Sorry now. Eddie English is just saying, thank you very much, Robert. We'll enjoy sailing even more in the waters of the west of Schull. John Malloy, very interesting lecture with great illustrations. Teresa O'Leary saying thank you. Anne-Marie the Doy, hope I've pronounced that right. Thank you, Robert. Great lecture. I would like to listen again, or if the recording will be made available. Yeah, so the recording will be put up on YouTube either tomorrow or in the next couple of days. So if you just search for Trasna and Atira, there you'll be able to see tonight's lecture. Luke Smith, fascinating, thank you. Carol Piotrus, thank you, that was very interesting. Karen Minahan, thanks, Robert, fascinating. Jennifer Allen, thank you, very interesting talk. Claudia, thanks a lot, most interesting. Miriam, thank you, fascinating, thank you. Brian Stewart, thank you. So Patrick Kilfeder. He said, I can only quote Goldsmith, and still they gazed, and still the wonder grew, that one small head could carry all he knew. A truly wonderful presentation, many thanks. Very nice compliment. Damien Hickey, fantastic job. Thanks, Robert. Teresa O'Leary, she has a question here. Do you know where the stained glass window of Grace O'Malley is in New York?
I did have that information. I haven't got it on my notes at the present time. If you'd like me to, I'll sort of try and search that one out and let you know somehow or other.
Michael O'Connell, very interesting, great lecture. Guru Mahagut. Colleen Das, thank you, Robert, for a fascinating talk. Brian Stewart has a question. From whom did Hull acquire Crookhaven?
I don't know that. Crookhaven, not only Crookhaven, he acquired Skull, Ross Bryn. So yes, I mean, whoever took them over, presumably they were planters, probably, who came over and took these places and then saw they could make some money by selling the leases to somebody else. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that, but I will look it up and see if I can find it. For next time.
Next time, yeah, we'll have you back again, especially over the maps. The maps are just fascinating.
Yeah, they will.
Michael Barry, very enjoyable, hugely interesting, Robert. By the way, if I remember, Sir Edward Denny in Tralee Bay was involved in piracy around 1588.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I think there's a good bit of information on Denny and around Tralee. Ita, thanks for the information. William Hull's tomb is in the graveyard in Skull.
Is it? I wonder. There are Hull. The Hull. Let me just say. I mean, he had many offspring.
Okay.
Many Hulls, and there are Hulls still around today. So yeah, there might be a William Hull in Skull. Although I've never seen it, and I certainly would be interested to. If he ended his days in Clonakilty, you'd expect him to be buried somewhere around there, but who knows? But thank you for that. It might set me off on a search there. Certainly, it would have been one of his offspring if it wasn't him himself.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on the year. JP English, thank you, very interesting, good job. Damien Green, thank you, fascinating history. I live in Drinane, Drinane, next townland over from Leamcon. He walks the dog to Castle Point every day.
Right.
And then Brian Stewart, again, saying great talk, Robert. Lots that he didn't know about. Yeah, that's all the questions for tonight, or all the comments, which is, it's absolutely fascinating. So again, another part of our history.
Yes, indeed.
Would have gone unknown, kind of thing. Oh, Isha's back. She's saying that yes, the tomb is on the left as you go in the main gate.
Yeah.
To the old part of the graveyard.
Okay, I should be there tomorrow. I have explored that, and in fact, I could have shown you some rather fine scratchings on the inner wall of the church there. There's a ruined church in that graveyard, which dates, I think, from 1700. But there are some boats, ships, in fact, scratched into the plaster, which are fascinating. I could have made them sound relevant to the talk. I can't lay my hands on them now, otherwise I could show you. But yeah, it's a fascinating place. So yes, he could be buried there, and it would be great to find him.
Absolutely. I'm assuming he's quite well known, or his histories or stories quite well known in around those parts. Or
well, there's quite a lot.
Bring him to life.
There's quite a lot to find out about him, but there's a lot we don't know. As I say, there's no portraits. I don't know that he was a very cultured man. He was very good at looking after himself and sort of making a profit. But apart from the garderobe seat, of course, that's quite a find, I think, which you can still see in Exeter Museum today. The very seat upon which sat William Hull.
Fascinating. of all the things to be left behind for Anyway, listen, Robert, that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. And just to let everyone know that a Wednesday night's lecture will be on the rise and fall of the Orange Order during the famine by Dr. Dara Curran. And we'll actually, on the 1st of February, have a lecture called Saints and Supers by Finola Finlay, Robert's wife. So it's another one to actually pencil in your diary. It could be an absolutely fascinating lecture. So I'm sure we'll have you back again, Robert, in for a follow-up, or definitely
I'll start where I left off.
Yeah, I think there's loads there that we still have to go through. So once again, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and we shall catch you soon. Thanks again.
Bye then.
Bye.